The woman in the denim jacket. The Marlowe Financial Institute had always been an imposing structure. Towering glass walls reflected the bustling city skyline, symbolizing power, prestige, and success. Inside, the polished marble floors, minimalist modern furniture, and faint scent of fresh espresso spoke volumes about the clientele it catered to. It was a space designed to dazzle, a temple to wealth and exclusivity. Employees moved about in tailored suits and professional attire, their sharp looks mirrored in their sharp movements. Conversations were precise, clipped, and carried the kind of confidence bred by years of dealing with high-stakes finance. It was in this bustling atmosphere that Catherine Street James stepped through the heavy glass doors of the bank for the first time in years. Dressed in a denim jacket, dark jeans, and a pair of well-worn sneakers, Catherine stood out like a pebble in a sea of diamonds. She carried no designer handbag, nor did she wear the kind of accessories that would have marked her as belonging in such a place. For a moment, her presence went unnoticed as the employees and patrons focused on their transactions. But moments of incongruity are always noticed eventually. The first glances were casual, almost dismissive. Then came the whispers. A pair of sharply dressed women seated near the corner turned their heads slightly, muttering under their breaths while sneaking another glance at Catherine. A man at the information counter raised an eyebrow, then promptly looked away, his expression a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Catherine noticed it all, but didn't let it faze her. She had learned long ago not to let other people's judgments define her actions. Her strides were measured and confident as she approached the reception desk. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm but firm. The young woman behind the desk, whose name tag read Linda, barely glanced up from her computer. When she finally did, her gaze swept over Catherine from head to toe. The condescension in her eyes was impossible to miss. "Yes?" Linda asked, her tone clipped and perfunctory. "Do you need help?" "Yes, I'd like to meet with the branch manager," Catherine replied. Linda blinked, momentarily thrown by the directness of the request. Then she let out a faint laugh, the kind meant to mock without being overt. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Catherine said simply. Linda leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Well, our manager is very busy. Unless you have an urgent issue or a prior appointment, you'll have to schedule a time to meet. We don't usually accommodate walk-ins." Behind her, two other employees exchanged amused glances. One of them whispered something to the other, prompting a smirk. Catherine caught the exchange but didn't react. "I understand," Catherine said, her voice steady. "But I think he'll want to see me." Linda raised an eyebrow, the corner of her mouth twitching into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And why's that?" Catherine returned the smile, though hers was softer, more enigmatic. "Let's just say it's important. Could you let him know I'm here?" Linda hesitated. The woman before her didn't look like anyone of consequence, certainly not the kind of person her manager would interrupt his day to see. And yet there was something in Catherine's demeanor, a quiet confidence that made Linda uneasy. But years of working in the bank had taught Linda to trust her instincts, and her instincts told her this woman was just another nobody with an inflated sense of entitlement. "I'm afraid I can't disturb him without a valid reason," Linda said, her tone turning icy. "If you'd like, I can schedule an appointment for later this week." Catherine nodded thoughtfully, as though considering the offer. Then she stepped back from the desk. "No need. I'll come back tomorrow. Things might be a little clearer then." Her words, delivered with a calmness that bordered on unsettling, hung in the air for a moment. Without another word, Catherine turned and walked out of the bank, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the marble floor. Linda watched her go, frowning. For some reason, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had made a mistake. Outside, Catherine took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the familiar cityscape. This bank wasn't just another institution to her. It was part of her story, a reminder of the obstacles she had faced and overcome. She thought back to the years she had spent building her business from the ground up. Starting out as a young woman of color in a field dominated by old money and old prejudices had been no small feat. But Catherine had done it, not by conforming to expectations, but by breaking them. She had faced countless moments like the one inside, moments where she was underestimated, dismissed, or outright ignored. And every time, she had used those moments as fuel to push herself further. Today had been no different. Tomorrow, however, would be. Inside the bank, Linda shared her encounter with her coworkers, embellishing Catherine's words and demeanor to make the story more amusing. They laughed and joked, exchanging sarcastic remarks about the audacity of some people. "If she comes back tomorrow," one of them said, "maybe she'll wear a suit this time. Then we might actually take her seriously." The others laughed, but Linda couldn't join in. Something about Catherine's parting words stayed with her, nagging at the edges of her thoughts. Things might be a little clearer then. What had she meant by that? Linda brushed the thought aside, telling herself it didn't matter. Catherine was just another person who didn't understand how the world worked, someone who thought confidence alone could get them what they wanted. But Linda would soon learn just how wrong she was. The power shift. The following morning, the Marlowe Financial Institute began its day like any other. The hum of espresso machines mingled with the clatter of keyboards as employees trickled in, carrying their neatly packed lunches and immaculate briefcases. The bank was alive with its usual rhythm, one of wealth, precision, and control. Linda arrived at her desk early, the same slight smirk curling her lips as she thought about the denim-clad woman from the day before. It had been the highlight of an otherwise monotonous Monday. She recounted the encounter to a colleague, exaggerating Catherine's calm demeanor to make it sound almost absurd. And then she said, "Things will be clearer tomorrow." Linda mimicked, throwing her hands in the air mockingly. "I mean, who does that? Like she's some kind of prophet or something." Her colleague laughed, shaking his head. Probably one of those motivational speakers trying to hustle alone. Linda chuckled. "Well, if she shows up again, maybe we should book her an appointment with reality." They shared a laugh, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing on the horizon. At exactly 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the bank officially opened to the public, Catherine returned. This time, her presence didn't go unnoticed. She entered the building with the same calm confidence as before, but something about her seemed different today. She wore the same denim jacket and sneakers, yet her strides carried an unmistakable sense of purpose. The receptionist, a young man named Elliot, froze mid-greeting as she walked past him without acknowledgement, heading straight for the conference room at the end of the main hall. Linda, sitting at her desk, caught sight of Catherine and felt her stomach drop. The casual assurance in the woman's steps made her uneasy in a way she couldn't quite explain. For a moment, she debated whether to intercept her but decided against it. "Let security handle her," Linda muttered under her breath, turning back to her computer. But Catherine wasn't heading for a teller window this time. She wasn't even looking for Linda. She had her sights set on the glass-walled conference room, where the bank's senior management team held their weekly meeting. Inside, Richard Foster, the branch manager, sat at the head of the long mahogany table, surrounded by his team of vice presidents and department heads. They were midway through discussing quarterly performance metrics when the door swung open. The sound was quiet but commanding enough to draw every pair of eyes in the room toward it. Richard looked up, irritation flickering across his face. "Excuse me," he began, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "This is a private meeting. You can't just walk in here." Catherine stepped inside, unbothered by the stares of the room's occupants. She closed the door behind her and took a moment to scan the table. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm but carrying an authority that was impossible to ignore. "Miss," Richard began, his tone sharpening. "Street James," Catherine said, cutting him off. "Catherine Street James, and I believe this meeting concerns me, doesn't it?" A tense silence fell over the room. Richard blinked, his irritation melting into confusion. The name sounded familiar, but it took him a moment to place it. Then it hit him like a thunderclap. "Wait, Street James?" he stammered, his face paling. "That's right," Catherine said, moving to the head of the table and placing her hands on the polished wood. "The new owner of Marlowe Financial. And as of this morning, your new boss." The room erupted into murmurs of disbelief. One of the vice presidents, a man in his late 40s, leaned forward. "This has to be a mistake," he said, looking at Catherine skeptically. "You can't just walk in here and—" "It's no mistake," Catherine interrupted, her voice steady. "I finalized the acquisition last week. The board voted unanimously to approve my leadership. You'll find the confirmation in your inboxes, though I imagine none of you bothered to check." Richard's jaw worked soundlessly as he fumbled for a response. He had indeed received an email from corporate headquarters about a leadership change, but he hadn't expected it to be this. "This is highly irregular," Richard managed to say. "I wasn't informed." "You were informed," Catherine said, fixing him with a steady gaze. "You just didn't pay attention. But don't worry, I'll make things very clear for everyone from now on." Back in the lobby, the whispers had started again. Employees craned their necks to catch a glimpse of what was happening in the conference room. "What's going on?" someone asked. "It's that woman from yesterday," another replied. "She just walked into the manager's meeting like she owns the place." Linda sat frozen at her desk, her cheeks burning with embarrassment and unease. Could it really be true? Was this woman, this denim-clad stranger, the new owner of the bank? Her thoughts raced back to the interaction they'd had the day before, her dismissive tone, the sarcastic remarks. If Catherine was who she claimed to be, Linda realized with a sinking feeling, then her behavior was about to catch up with her. In the conference room, Catherine had taken a seat at the head of the table, a place she had earned not through appearances, but through grit, determination, and years of hard work. "I've reviewed the bank's performance metrics," she said, her tone measured but firm. "And while the numbers are strong, I've noticed a disturbing trend in the way this branch operates." Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "What kind of trend?" "A trend of exclusion," Catherine said. "A culture that prioritizes appearances over competence, that dismisses people based on assumptions rather than merit. I saw it firsthand yesterday, and I have no doubt it's a systemic issue." The room fell silent. "This is going to change," Catherine continued. "Effective immediately, we'll be implementing new training programs to address unconscious bias and foster a more inclusive environment. I'll also be conducting individual performance reviews to ensure that every employee, not just management, is held accountable for their actions." Her words landed like a hammer. Some of the executives bristled at the implication that their behavior would be scrutinized, but none dared to challenge her. As the meeting adjourned, Catherine stood and straightened her jacket. Before leaving, she turned to Richard. "And one more thing," she said. "Please ensure that all employees understand the importance of treating every customer with respect, regardless of how they look or what they're wearing. That's not just a policy. It's a standard I expect you to uphold." With that, she walked out of the conference room, leaving behind a group of stunned executives scrambling to adjust to the new reality. In the lobby, every head turned as Catherine made her way to the exit. For a brief moment, her gaze met Linda's. There was no anger in Catherine's eyes, no smugness, only a quiet strength that spoke louder than words. Linda swallowed hard, her earlier confidence evaporating. She wanted to say something, to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. Catherine didn't wait. She pushed open the glass doors and stepped out into the city, leaving behind a trail of shocked faces and a bank forever change. A new standard. The morning air was crisp as Catherine walked out of the Marlowe Financial Institute, her head held high. The sun broke through the towering city buildings, casting its light onto the busy streets, but Catherine barely noticed. Her thoughts were focused on the transformation that awaited the institution she now led. She wasn't naive. Change, especially cultural change, wasn't easy, and she expected resistance from those who thrived in the old system. But Catherine had built her career by taking on challenges no one else dared to confront, and she wasn't about to stop now. Back inside the bank, however, the shockwaves of her declaration were still rippling through the staff. Linda sat at her desk, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly. She tried to focus on her computer screen, but her mind kept replaying the events of the last 24 hours. She could hardly believe that the same woman she had dismissed so casually the day before was now her boss, the owner of the entire bank. Her colleagues weren't much better off. Conversations in hushed tones erupted among the employees, most of whom had only just learned of the change in leadership. "Did you hear what she said in the meeting?" whispered one of the senior tellers to another. "Bias training. Individual reviews. She's going to tear this place apart," the other replied, glancing nervously toward the conference room. In a corner of the break room, a group of junior employees huddled together, their faces a mixture of curiosity and unease. "I kind of admire her," said one young woman, biting her lip. "She didn't back down yesterday, even when Linda was being, well, Linda." "Yeah, but you saw how Richard looked in there," another chimed in. "He's terrified. And if he's terrified, we should all be." "Maybe she's exactly what this place needs," the first woman said, crossing her arms. The others fell silent, unsure whether they agreed or if it was safer to stay neutral. Catherine spent the rest of the morning in her newly assigned office, a spacious corner room with panoramic views of the city. It was a symbol of power, but she was uninterested in symbolism. Her focus was on the work ahead. She reviewed the organizational structure, taking note of the employees' roles, tenure, and performance metrics. The numbers were impressive. Marlowe Financial was profitable and well regarded in the industry. But profitability alone didn't make a business great. For Catherine, greatness came from creating a culture where everyone, from the janitor to the CEO, felt valued and respected. She thought back to her own journey. Catherine had grown up in a working-class neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and expectations low. Her parents had taught her the importance of hard work and integrity, but society had often judged her by her skin color, her gender, and her lack of wealth. She had spent years proving herself, fighting for every inch of success. And now here she was. Her reverie was interrupted by a knock on the door. "Come in," Catherine said, straightening in her chair. The door opened to reveal Richard Foster, the branch manager, his usual air of authority noticeably diminished. He hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, holding a folder in his hands. "Miss Street James," he began, his voice carefully measured. "I thought I'd stop by to formally welcome you and provide some additional context about the branch's operations." Catherine gestured to the seat across from her desk. "Please, have a seat." Richard sat down, his posture stiff. He placed the folder on her desk but didn't open it. Instead, he cleared his throat. "I'll admit, yesterday's announcement took us all by surprise," he said. "But I want you to know that we're committed to working with you to ensure a smooth transition." Catherine smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I appreciate that, Richard, and I'll need your support to make the changes this branch needs. But let me be clear, this isn't just about a smooth transition. It's about transforming the way we do business." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Transforming in what way?" "For starters," Catherine said, leaning forward, "we need to address the culture of exclusivity that permeates this place. Yesterday, I was treated like I didn't belong, by your staff, your customers, and even you. That's unacceptable. If this bank is going to thrive, we need to create an environment where everyone feels welcome and valued, regardless of how they look or what they wear." Richard's face reddened. "I understand your concerns, Miss Street James, but this is a high-profile institution. Our clientele expects a certain level of professionalism and decorum." "Professionalism isn't about how someone dresses," Catherine replied firmly. "It's about how they treat others. And decorum doesn't mean turning away people who don't fit a narrow mold of success." Richard fell silent, his gaze dropping to the folder in front of him. "I'll be implementing several initiatives to address these issues," Catherine continued, "and I'll need your help to enforce them." Richard nodded reluctantly. Of course. Whatever you need. That afternoon, Catherine made her first public appearance in the bank's main lobby. She had decided to meet with the staff informally, walking among them to observe their interactions and introduce herself. Linda watched nervously as Catherine approached her desk. She felt a lump rise in her throat as Catherine stopped in front of her, meeting her gaze. "Linda, isn't it?" Catherine asked, her tone calm but unreadable. "Yes, ma'am," Linda replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I remember our conversation yesterday," Catherine said, tilting her head slightly. "Do you?" Linda nodded, her cheeks flushing. "I appreciate honesty, Linda," Catherine said, her gaze steady. "But there's a fine line between honesty and disrespect. It's a line I expect everyone here to understand moving forward." "Yes, ma'am," Linda repeated, her hands fidgeting nervously. Catherine's expression softened slightly. "Good. I'm counting on you to set an example. Let's work together to make this a place where everyone feels valued." Linda nodded again, her throat too tight to speak. As Catherine moved on, the employees watched her with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She wasn't what they had expected in a leader, but maybe that was exactly what they needed. "I kind of admire her," said one young woman, biting her lip. "She didn't back down yesterday, even when Linda was being, well, Linda." "Yeah, but you saw how Richard looked in there," another chimed in. "He's terrified. And if he's terrified, we should all be." "Maybe she's exactly what this place needs," the first woman said, crossing her arms. The others fell silent, unsure whether they agreed or if it was safer to stay neutral. Catherine spent the rest of the morning in her newly assigned office, a spacious corner room with panoramic views of the city. It was a symbol of power, but she was uninterested in symbolism. Her focus was on the work ahead. She reviewed the organizational structure, taking note of the employees' roles, tenure, and performance metrics. The numbers were impressive. Marlowe Financial was profitable and well regarded in the industry. But profitability alone didn't make a business great. For Catherine, greatness came from creating a culture where everyone, from the janitor to the CEO, felt valued and respected. She thought back to her own journey. Catherine had grown up in a working-class neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and expectations low. Her parents had taught her the importance of hard work and integrity, but society had often judged her by her skin color, her gender, and her lack of wealth. She had spent years proving herself, fighting for every inch of success. And now here she was. Her reverie was interrupted by a knock on the door. "Come in," Catherine said, straightening in her chair. The door opened to reveal Richard Foster, the branch manager, his usual air of authority noticeably diminished. He hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, holding a folder in his hands. "Miss Street James," he began, his voice carefully measured. "I thought I'd stop by to formally welcome you and provide some additional context about the branch's operations." Catherine gestured to the seat across from her desk. "Please, have a seat." Richard sat down, his posture stiff. He placed the folder on her desk but didn't open it. Instead, he cleared his throat. "I'll admit, yesterday's announcement took us all by surprise," he said. "But I want you to know that we're committed to working with you to ensure a smooth transition." Catherine smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I appreciate that, Richard, and I'll need your support to make the changes this branch needs. But let me be clear, this isn't just about a smooth transition. It's about transforming the way we do business." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Transforming in what way?" "For starters," Catherine said, leaning forward, "we need to address the culture of exclusivity that permeates this place. Yesterday, I was treated like I didn't belong, by your staff, your customers, and even you. That's unacceptable. If this bank is going to thrive, we need to create an environment where everyone feels welcome and valued, regardless of how they look or what they wear." Richard's face reddened. "I understand your concerns, Miss Street James, but this is a high-profile institution. Our clientele expects a certain level of professionalism and decorum. Professionalism isn't about how someone dresses, Catherine replied firmly. It's about how they treat others. And decorum doesn't mean turning away people who don't fit a narrow mold of success. Richard fell silent, his gaze dropping to the folder in front of him. I'll be implementing several initiatives to address these issues, Catherine continued. And I'll need your help to enforce them. Richard nodded reluctantly. Of course. Whatever you need. That afternoon, Catherine made her first public appearance in the bank's main lobby. She had decided to meet with the staff informally, walking among them to observe their interactions and introduce herself. Linda watched nervously as Catherine approached her desk. She felt a lump rise in her throat as Catherine stopped in front of her, meeting her gaze. Linda, isn't it? Catherine asked, her tone calm but unreadable. Yes, ma'am, Linda replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I remember our conversation yesterday, Catherine said, tilting her head slightly. Do you? Linda nodded, her cheeks flushing. I appreciate honesty, Linda, Catherine said, her gaze steady. But there's a fine line between honesty and disrespect. It's a line I expect everyone here to understand moving forward. Yes, ma'am, Linda repeated, her hands fidgeting nervously. Catherine's expression softened slightly. Good. I'm counting on you to set an example. Let's work together to make this a place where everyone feels valued. Linda nodded again, her throat too tight to speak. As Catherine moved on, the employees watched her with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She wasn't what they had expected in a leader, but maybe that was exactly what they needed. The workshops were a resounding success. Word spread quickly, and the bank became a beacon of hope for people who had long felt excluded from the financial system. Customers began to see the bank in a new light, not just as a place for transactions, but as an institution that genuinely cared about its community. Phase 3. The employee shift. As the weeks went by, Catherine's changes began to ripple through the staff. Employees who had once been skeptical started to buy into her vision. Linda, in particular, experienced a profound transformation. She began volunteering for the financial literacy workshops, surprising even herself. For the first time, she saw how her work could make a tangible difference in people's lives. One evening, after a workshop, a young woman approached Linda with tears in her eyes. Thank you, the woman said, clutching a workbook. No one ever taught me this stuff before. You've changed my life. Linda was stunned. In that moment, she realized how much she had underestimated not only Catherine, but also herself. Back at the bank, employees started to treat one another with more respect. The whispers and judgment that had once filled the air were replaced by collaboration and camaraderie. Catherine's leadership had set a new standard, one that was rooted in empathy, humility, and purpose. The turning point. One Friday afternoon, Catherine called an all-staff meeting in the main lobby. Employees gathered, their curiosity piqued. Standing at the center of the room, Catherine addressed them with the same calm authority that had come to define her leadership. When I first walked into this bank, she began, I was judged for how I looked, not for who I was or what I could bring to the table. But I didn't take it personally, because I know that judgment isn't about the person being judged. It's about the insecurities of the person doing the judging. She paused, letting her words sink in. Today, I see a bank that's starting to change. I see employees who are stepping up, not just as professionals but as people. And I see a future where Marlowe Financial isn't just a place for the wealthy but a place for everyone. That's the kind of legacy we're building together. The room erupted into applause. As Catherine looked around, she saw faces that were no longer wary but hopeful. She knew the journey wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt the weight of her vision being shared by others. And that was the real ripple effect. The power of one person to inspire change, not by demanding it, but by living it. A test of integrity. The transformation at Marlowe Financial Institute was evident, but Catherine knew that true change would be tested under pressure. As the weeks turned into months, the bank faced a significant challenge that would put its newfound values to the ultimate test. It began one rainy Monday morning when the local news reported the collapse of a prominent investment firm. The firm's clients, many of whom were also customers at Marlowe Financial, began to panic. Fear spread like wildfire, and by midday, the bank's phone lines were flooded with calls. Linda, now a trusted team member, sat at her desk fielding frantic inquiries. She glanced up at Catherine, who was standing near the entrance, calmly observing the scene. "Catherine," Linda said, motioning her over, "a lot of our clients are worried about their savings. They're asking if we're stable." Catherine nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Let's address their concerns directly. Transparency is key. Schedule a town hall meeting for this evening. We'll invite our clients and answer every question they have. A transparent conversation." By 6 p.m., the bank's main lobby was packed with clients, employees, and even a few reporters. Catherine stood at the front, flanked by Richard Foster and the bank's senior management team. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady. "I know many of you are concerned about the recent events in the financial sector. Let me assure you, Marlowe Financial is stable and your money is secure. But I want to go beyond reassurance. I want to explain why." Catherine spent the next 30 minutes breaking down the bank's financial health in terms that everyone could understand. She didn't shy away from tough questions, addressing them with a combination of honesty and expertise. One client, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit, stood up. "Why should we trust you?" he asked bluntly. "You're new here. How do we know you have the experience to handle a crisis like this?" Catherine met his gaze without flinching. "That's a fair question," she replied. "Trust isn't something I can ask for. It's something I have to earn. All I can say is that I built my career on making smart, ethical decisions, and I'm not here to gamble with your money or your trust. I'm here to protect both." One client, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit, stood up. "Why should we trust you?" he asked bluntly. "You're new here. How do we know you have the experience to handle a crisis like this?" Catherine met his gaze without flinching. "That's a fair question," she replied. "Trust isn't something I can ask for. It's something I have to earn. All I can say is that I built my career on making smart, ethical decisions, and I'm not here to gamble with your money or your trust. I'm here to protect both." Her candor resonated with the audience. By the end of the meeting, many clients approached her to express their gratitude. Linda watched from a distance, feeling a swell of pride. The woman she had once dismissed was now the pillar of stability that everyone, including Linda herself, relied on. Internal pressures. The external crisis wasn't the only challenge Catherine faced. Internally, the bank's leadership team was divided on how to respond to the growing uncertainty in the market. Some executives pushed for aggressive cost-cutting measures, including layoffs and the elimination of community programs. Richard Foster, who had slowly begun to respect Catherine's leadership, approached her with a proposal. "Catherine, I know you value our community initiatives, but we might need to scale them back. The board is nervous, and they want to see immediate action." Catherine shook her head. "Scaling back on what makes us different is not the answer, Richard. If anything, we need to double down on our commitment to the community. That's what will set us apart in a time of crisis." Richard hesitated. "But the board." "I'll handle the board," Catherine said firmly. Facing the board. The next day, Catherine met with the bank's board of directors. The room was filled with seasoned professionals, many of whom had been skeptical of her appointment from the start. "Catherine," one board member began, "we're concerned about the financial strain these community programs are putting on the bank. In light of the current climate, we recommend suspending them temporarily." Catherine stood, her hands resting on the table. "I understand your concerns, but let me ask you this. What's the cost of losing trust? If we pull back now, we're telling our clients and our community that our values only matter when it's convenient. That's not the kind of bank I'm leading." Another board member interjected. And if the bank's profits decline? Catherine smiled. Short-term profits are not the only measure of success. Stability, trust, and loyalty. Those are the foundations of long-term growth. If we stand by our principles now, our clients will remember it when the dust settles. The room fell silent. After a moment, the chairman nodded. We'll support your decision, Catherine. But understand, the pressure will be on you to deliver. A turning point. The next few weeks were critical. Catherine worked tirelessly, balancing the demands of running the bank with her commitment to the community. The financial literacy workshops continued, and Catherine personally attended several, reinforcing her hands-on leadership style. One evening, after a workshop, a young couple approached Catherine. "We wanted to thank you," the woman said, holding her husband's hand. "Because of this program, we've started saving for our first home. It feels like a dream is finally within reach." Catherine smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Moments like these reminded her why she had fought so hard to leave the bank. The ripple expands. As the crisis began to stabilize, something remarkable happened. Clients who had initially been skeptical of Catherine's leadership started referring their friends and family to Marlowe Financial. The bank's reputation as a trustworthy, community-focused institution grew, attracting new customers and solidifying the loyalty of existing ones. Linda, now one of the most enthusiastic advocates for the bank's new direction, approached Catherine one afternoon. "You were right," she said, "about everything. I used to think leadership was about power, but you've shown me it's about purpose." Catherine placed a hand on Linda's shoulder. "Leadership is a responsibility, Linda, and you're stepping into it beautifully." The bigger picture. Months later, as Catherine prepared for an annual review meeting with the board, she reflected on the journey so far. The bank was not only thriving financially, but also becoming a model for how businesses could balance profitability with social responsibility. When she entered the boardroom, the chairman stood to greet her. "Catherine," he said, "you've exceeded every expectation. The numbers speak for themselves, but more importantly, so do the stories we're hearing from our clients and employees. You've set a new standard for what this bank can be." Catherine smiled, her confidence tempered with humility. "Thank you. But this is just the beginning. There's still so much more we can do." As she left the meeting, Catherine felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't expected. She had faced judgment, resistance, and doubt, but through it all, she had remained true to her vision. And in doing so, she had not only transformed the bank, but also inspired everyone around her to believe in the power of integrity, empathy, and resilience. Legacy in the making. Catherine's leadership at Marlowe Financial had created a seismic shift, not only within the institution, but also in the broader community it served. However, she knew that real transformation wasn't about her tenure as president. It was about building a culture that would endure long after her time at the helm. As the one-year anniversary of her appointment approached, Catherine was presented with a unique opportunity to cement her legacy, an invitation to speak at the National Banking Leadership Summit. The summit was a prestigious event attended by the country's most influential financial leaders, and Catherine's inclusion was both an honor and a challenge. While preparing her speech, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The hurdles, the skeptics, and the triumphs had all taught her invaluable lessons. But this wasn't about recounting her personal victories. It was about sharing a vision for a more inclusive, compassionate, and sustainable financial industry. A nervous start. On the morning of the summit, Catherine arrived at the Grand Conference Center in a modest but elegant outfit, true to her style. The room buzzed with energy, filled with towering egos and sharp minds. Many attendees greeted her politely, but with a certain detachment, as if unsure whether she truly belonged in such a space. As the moderator introduced her, Catherine walked onto the stage with steady steps. She paused for a moment, taking in the sea of expectant faces, and began her speech. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear but warm. "I'm here today because I believe the financial industry is at a crossroads. For too long, we've equated power with exclusivity and success with personal gain. But I've seen firsthand how this approach alienates the very people we're meant to serve. And I'm here to tell you, there's a better way, a vision for the future. Catherine shared stories of transformation from Marlowe Financial. The single mother who had started her own business with the help of the bank's microloan program, the young man who had turned his financial literacy workshop into a college fund for his siblings, and even the employees who had found new purpose in their roles. Our role as financial leaders is not just to safeguard wealth, Catherine continued. It's to empower individuals to build lives of dignity and opportunity. When we prioritize people over profit, something remarkable happens. Profits follow, but so do trust, loyalty, and community. The room was silent, the audience hanging on her every word. Catherine's authenticity and conviction were undeniable, and even the most skeptical attendees couldn't help but be drawn in. A question of scale. After the speech, Catherine participated in a panel discussion. One of the other panelists, a seasoned banker with decades of experience, challenged her. "Catherine, your ideals are admirable," he said, leaning forward. "But Marlowe Financial is a single institution. How do you plan to scale this model across an industry that's driven by competition and shareholder demands?" Catherine smiled, unfazed. "You're right. Scaling change isn't easy. But it starts with small steps. It starts with asking the right questions. How can we align our business goals with social impact? How can we measure success in ways that go beyond the bottom line? At Marlowe, we've learned that when clients trust us, they don't just stay, they advocate for us. That's a competitive advantage no amount of advertising can buy." The audience erupted into applause, and even the panelists nodded in begrudging agreement. A surprise offer. After the summit, Catherine was approached by several executives from other financial institutions. One of them, the CEO of a major national bank, pulled her aside. "Catherine, I've been following your work at Marlowe," he said. "What you've achieved is nothing short of revolutionary. I'd like to discuss the possibility of bringing you on as a consultant to help us implement similar changes at our bank." Catherine was taken aback. The offer was tempting, an opportunity to extend her impact on a much larger scale. But she knew she couldn't rush such a decision. "I'm honored," she replied. "Let me give it some thought. My first priority is ensuring that the work we've started at Marlowe continues to thrive." The CEO nodded. "Fair enough. But don't wait too long. We need leaders like you." Back at Marlowe. Returning to Marlowe Financial after the summit, Catherine found herself more energized than ever. She called a meeting with her leadership team to share the insights she'd gained. "I want us to think about how we can lead by example," she said. "Let's invite other community banks to collaborate with us on initiatives like financial literacy and small business support. Together, we can create a network of institutions committed to putting people first." Richard, who had become one of Catherine's staunchest allies, nodded. "You've got my full support. Let's make it happen." The power of mentorship. As part of her long-term strategy, Catherine launched a mentorship program for employees. She paired seasoned staff members with newer hires, fostering a culture of learning and growth. Linda, once a symbol of skepticism, became a stand-up mentor, guiding her mentees with empathy and wisdom. One day, Linda approached Catherine with a smile. "You've changed everything here," she said. "But more importantly, you've changed me. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't deserve it." Catherine shook her head. "You always deserved it, Linda. You just needed someone to show you the way." Passing the torch. After 2 years at Marlowe, Catherine made the difficult decision to step down as president. She felt confident that the bank was in good hands, with a strong team and a clear vision for the future. At her farewell celebration, employees and clients alike shared stories of how Catherine had impacted their lives. Richard summed it up best. "Catherine didn't just lead this bank, she transformed it. She reminded us that business isn't just about numbers, it's about people. And for that, we'll always be grateful." As Catherine walked out of the bank for the last time, She felt a sense of peace. Her journey at Marlowe was complete, but her mission was far from over. She had proven that integrity and compassion could thrive in even the most cutthroat industries. And now she was ready to take that lesson to the world.